1939, rural England. A thin fog drifts low over a frozen English field. Frost clings to rows of cabbages glinting pale beneath a gray sky. A farmer, wool coat patched at the elbows, kneels, scooping pale granules from a burlap sack marked ammonium nitrate. He's thinking about spring yields, not the coming war. Each handful glimmers like crushed chalk. On a nearby table, an uninvited guest watches silently. A young chemist from a government lab, notebook in hand. He jots a line, his fingers trembling in the cold. Somewhere behind them, the muffled thud of an explosion rolls across the hills, a test charge from the nearby Woolwich range. The sound makes the farmer glance up, faintly uneasy. To him, it's routine background noise, but to the chemist, it's a hint of connection. The very same fertilizer that coaxes life from the soil could also feed fire to destruction. Within months, the world will understand just how true that is. The ridiculous farm chemical, cheap, stable, and abundant, will become the secret weapon that turns ordinary TNT into something almost unrecognizably powerful. The frost melts slowly into mud, and the farmer's field becomes history's laboratory. The decade before the Second World War was a quiet revolution in chemistry. Industrial nations, still haunted by the attrition of 1914 to 1918, understood that the next conflict would be fought as much in laboratories as on battlefields. Every factory able to refine oil, smelt metal, or synthesize nitrates was, in effect, an arsenal in waiting. Nitrogen lay at the heart of it all. Once drawn only from natural deposits of Chilean saltpeter, the element had become a man-made resource thanks to one of chemistry's most transformative achievements, the Haber-Bosch process. Fritz Haber had proved that atmospheric nitrogen, captured and fixed using high pressure and heat, could be turned into ammonia. His compatriot, Carl Bosch, industrialized it. By the 1930s, virtually every major power relied on this technology. It illuminated crops, and, chillingly, it filled shells. Britain's Ministry of Supply and Germany's research giants like IG Farben were quietly racing not only for better explosives, but also for independence from import bottlenecks. The Great War had shown that munitions capacity could decide national survival. At the same moment, agricultural ministries were urging more fertilizer to feed populations still recovering from Depression-era rationing. Economic planners saw only efficiency. Few recognized the moral convergence of these two ambitions. TNT, trinitrotoluene, was still the benchmark explosive. Stable, moldable, and reliable in storage, it powered virtually every artillery shell and aerial bomb. Yet it had limits. TNT's detonation velocity and casting behavior were finite. Creating a larger blast meant using more of it and more nitrogen. The chemistry of opportunity was obvious. Augment existing TNT with another oxygen-rich, nitrogen-heavy compound that was cheap to make. Enter ammonium nitrate, the farmer's ally. When mixed in measured proportion with TNT, it formed ammitol, an energetic explosive nearly 40% stronger by mass, while consuming far fewer strategic ingredients. The idea sounded implausible to some, a rural fertilizer helping win wars, but wartime pragmatism rarely cared for elegance. In government laboratories scattered across Britain, France, Germany, and the United States, technicians began running controlled detonations using small cast blocks of this new blend. Early trials revealed quirks. Too much moisture and the ammonium nitrate absorbed water, degrading the mixture. Too little care in blending, and it separated under shock. But when perfected, its detonation signature told the story unmistakably. A deeper, sharper wave front, capable of cratering soil and concrete alike. By late 1938, as Hitler's ambitions pressed across Europe, the chemical arms race intensified. The British Royal Arsenal recruited industrial chemists from Imperial Chemical Industries and Brunner Company to test variations of ammitol fillings. The Germans, meanwhile, explored analogous mixtures, ammonal and other nitrate-based charges, fueled by the same idea but optimized for their production lines. To common citizens, this was all invisible. Fertilizer shipments rose on paper. Tractor supply catalogs listed new nitrogen amendments. The world seemed to be preparing for plenty, not war. Yet behind factory gates, The kilns and mixers producing those same ammonium compounds were quietly redesignated for urgent national service. The British strategy hinged on foresight: stockpile nitrates now, and you could both feed your populace and fill your bombs later. It was, in cynical administrative shorthand, dual-use efficiency. Parliament debated coal imports while chemists debated crystal lattices, calculating precisely how to align molecules for maximum explosive yield. This convergence of agriculture and armament created a paradox that history often overlooks. The success of Europe's farms meant also the success of its arsenals. The farmer digging in his field and the engineer alloying steel artillery shells were, whether he liked it or not, partners in the same cycle of nitrogen. By the outbreak of war in September 1939, production plants across the United Kingdom and continental Europe had quietly laid the groundwork for one of the most significant changes in modern munitions chemistry. When the bombs began to fall, first on Warsaw, then on London, the raw material that once promised bread was already powering the opposite outcome. And in that transformation, the world saw the first hints of an industrial logic that would define the entire conflict. Use everything: science, soil, sweat, until nothing gentle remains. The laboratory lights burn longer, furnaces roar brighter, and the simple white crystals once brushed from a farmer's glove now roll down mechanized conveyor belts toward shells and casings. Their quiet journey from field to factory is about to reshape not just explosives, but the very rhythm of total war itself. The first months of the war revealed just how vital chemistry had become. Britain's early bombing campaigns over Germany quickly underscored one problem. Every ton of TNT demanded resources the island nation could barely supply. To win a war of attrition, Britain needed a cheaper spark. And so, engineers turned to the quiet white powder they already had in abundance: fertilizer ammonium nitrate. TNT, though astonishingly stable, burned with its own restraint. It was reliable but expensive, heavy but not as efficient as research suggested it could be. Ammonium nitrate, once dismissed as farmyard chemistry, offered a solution both scientific and strategic. It extended limited TNT stockpiles while delivering a larger explosive yield. At Woolwich Arsenal, technicians began melting TNT and folding in pulverized ammonium nitrate under careful heat control. The mixture cooled to a waxy consistency, then hardened inside shells and bomb casings. When properly balanced, this new compound, amytal, could deliver roughly the same destructive effect as pure TNT at just a fraction of the cost. It became a wartime staple overnight. Across the Channel, German scientists reached similar conclusions. At IG Farben's laboratories, the search for resource-efficient explosives led to formulations like ammonal and nitramone. Both relied on the same conceptual foundation: blend the oxidizing strength of ammonium nitrate with powdered metals or TNT to unleash higher brisance from fewer rare elements. However fierce their enmity, Allied and Axis chemists were mirroring each other through wartime necessity. This subtle arms race in chemical recipes rarely makes the headlines of history books, yet it quietly determined how many bombs each side could produce. The Allies, benefiting from vast nitrate plants originally built for agriculture, found they could scale production quickly. Germany, constrained by Allied naval blockades, compensated with research sophistication, stabilizers, coatings, and precise granule sizes to make mixtures less moisture-sensitive. Both sides discovered that logistics could be chemistry by other means. While scientists balanced stoichiometric equations, military planners balanced risk. Amytal, powerful though it was, produced denser fumes when detonated, obscuring targets for follow-up strikes. It also posed storage challenges. Ammonium nitrate's hygroscopic nature meant bombs could crack or swell if left too long in humid depots. Engineering fix after fix followed: shell linings, paraffin coatings, temperature-controlled bunkers, all to protect an explosive whose core ingredient had once been stored in wooden sheds on farms. In factories across Britain, places like Bridgewater and Swinnerton, thousands of workers, many of them women newly recruited to munition duty, followed precise formulas that mixed agricultural and military worlds. Routine safety lectures warned against open flames and against careless handling of even damp fertilizer dust. The work was monotonous, But each batch carried the promise of victory and the shadow of catastrophe. On the other side of Europe, Soviet industry learned fast. Facing material shortages as Nazi forces advanced, Soviet engineers adapted captured stores of German nitric compounds, mixing them into their own wartime formulations. The chemistry was unforgiving but necessary. When munitions dumps ran low, every pound of nitrate mattered. Ammittal soon filled not only bombs, but also depth charges and torpedo warheads. The Royal Navy embraced it for its cost efficiency, while the Luftwaffe poured it into the tons of ordnance dropped over London and Warsaw. The same principle, fertilizer transformed into explosive strength, echoed on both sides of the front. Resourcefulness defined the era. This was total war. Every chemical process, every ton of mined, or every gram of nitrogen had to serve the purpose of survival. Academic laboratories that once studied fertilizers for yield optimization now recalculated them for detonation velocity. Science no longer asked how much can this grow, but how much can this destroy. Yet the transformation carried an unspoken irony. While new explosive plants roared day and night, homefront victory gardens continued to depend on the same solution, ammonium fertilizer. Food and fire drew sustenance from the same molecule. The very factor feeding Britain's harvests also shattered cities abroad. By 1942, Ammittal and its descendants dominated Allied bomb production. Its efficiency helped enable the sustained aerial campaigns of the later war years, the 1,000-bomber raids, the naval blockades, the artillery drumming along every front. Behind each explosion lay the humble chemistry of oxidizers and reducers ripped from agricultural textbooks. It was never just a lab discovery. It was an entire logistical philosophy, a belief that the raw materials of peace could, when demanded, be reforged into instruments of survival and victory. The lines between farm and factory blurred irrevocably, and within this chemical twilight the world stumbled into a modern paradox. Science could be utterly neutral, yet no human use of it ever would. From the quiet of fertilizer sheds to the continual thunder of front lines, the transformation was complete. But chemistry's evolution didn't stop with Ammittal. Engineers soon began chasing something faster, denser, and deadlier still. For behind every new explosive was the question demanding its own answer. How much more power can be found in the molecules we already hold? That pursuit opens the next chapter. In the shadowed industrial halls of wartime Britain, heaped sacks of fertilizer stood beside steel bomb casings. The connection shocked no one anymore. By 1941, the line between farmer and munitions worker had all but vanished. Most of those who made the improved TNT mixture never saw the front. They were clerks, farmhands, and housewives drafted into chemistry by circumstance. They measured white dust on steel scales, stirred molten TNT in steam-heated vats, and wiped sweat from faces unsure whether fear or fumes caused the sting in their eyes. Diaries from munitions women in Swinnerton and Bridgewater tell of the yellow stains, TNT's signature, on skin and clothing, a badge of both patriotism and hazard. They knew what they were helping build, but often clung to the thought that each bomb might shorten the war by a minute. Ironically, the parent compound ammonium nitrate, the harmless farm chemical, was the least frightening part of their jobs. Its presence softened guilt. It was fertilizer, after all, not some devil's brew. Meanwhile, farmers continued spreading similar granules across their struggling fields, urged by ministry pamphlets to grow victory. Unknown to them, the waste streams and chemical byproducts from their fertilizer suppliers were flowing directly back into the war machine. Nitrogen fed both bread and bombardment in a seamless, morally tangled loop. On paper, the Ammittal formula appeared deceptively simple, roughly 80 parts ammonium nitrate to 20 parts TNT by weight for bulk fillings, or 60/40ths for higher performance. The genius lay not in the ingredients, but in their marriage. TNT provided a stable fuel matrix. Ammonium nitrate contributed oxygen and reactive nitrogen. When detonated, the pair completed each other chemically, fuel and oxidizer finding equilibrium in microseconds. Early experiments in Britain revealed a challenge. TNT melted around 80 degrees Celsius, but ammonium nitrate degraded quickly if moisture intruded. Engineers had to perfect drying systems, and developed mechanical stirrers that folded the slurry evenly before it set. At Woolwich, technicians used repurposed bakery mixers lined with copper to prevent static discharge. For war engineers, it was the physical behavior of ammitol that impressed most. The blend detonated with a velocity approaching 7,000 meters per second, a considerable leap over TNT alone, and exhibited less sensitivity during handling than pure nitrate compositions. It also produced a broader pressure wave, ideal for blast damage on masonry targets. The chemical economy mattered just as much. Producing 1 ton of TNT consumed roughly a ton of scarce toluene derived from coal tar. By cutting TNT content nearly in half, the Allies could stretch limited reserves for broader use. In a conflict where every shipment route was under attack, that efficiency became as powerful as the explosive itself. In time, ammitol inspired a family of new explosives: Torpex, Minol, Composition B, all born from wartime curiosity about how to extract more energy from less. Each derivative traced its ancestry to the idea that fertilizer could teach TNT new tricks. A science room mixture had now become a tactical advantage. For commanders planning bombing raids or artillery barges, the ammitol equation represented more than chemistry. It was logistics turned into firepower. A Lancaster bomber carrying 6,400 kilograms of ammitol-filled bombs delivered a far stronger shockwave than the same payload of TNT, effectively multiplying destructive radius without increasing takeoff weight. Naval engineers appreciated its adaptability. Depth charges packed with ammitol could rupture submarine hulls at greater distances, crucial in the Battle of the Atlantic. Artillery benefited too. The Soviet and German forces, both known for relentless ground shelling, filled long-range ordnance with nitrate TNT variants to maintain supply under intense demand. On the Eastern Front, munitions trains carried shells labeled with technical codes like AE or and to signify the explosive class. Feldgrau-clad gunners might never have understood the chemistry, but they noticed the result: deeper craters, faster shock reverberation, and in confined targets like bunkers, more crushing overpressure. There were drawbacks, of course. Ammitol was less brisant than cutting-edge formulations like RDX, and its smoky exhaust often hung in the air after detonation, an unintended signal for counterfire. But when scaled to tens of thousands of bombs a month, its balance of power, cost, and availability made it irreplaceable. From a tactical viewpoint, the ridiculous fertilizer trick became one of the war's most practical solutions. It ensured that resources reached the front lines faster, that bombing fleets could sustain prolonged engagements, and that nations facing blockade could still deliver decisive impact. Some officers joked grimly that they were feeding the enemy through the air, a dark pun on the shared feedstock of war and harvest. Yet beneath the humor was recognition. Chemistry had, in a quiet way, reshaped grand strategy. And while battlefield planners saw efficiency charts, scientists saw something else forming in those reaction vessels, a doorway to entirely new families of explosives and propellants. That next discovery, driven by the same hunger for more power per molecule, would pull humanity still deeper into the paradox of progress through destruction. By 1942, entire landscapes echoed with the rhythm of nitrate production. Fertilizer plants that once emitted the gentle hiss of steam now pulsed day and night under armed guard. The infrastructure of nourishment had become the infrastructure of devastation. The British government's Ministry of Supply commandeered rural ammonium nitrate facilities, adapting them for munitions filling. Conveyor belts designed for fertilizer packaging were overhauled to pour hot ammitol into bomb casings. Continuous process became the new creed. Never let the line stop. At the Swinnerton Royal Ordnance Factory alone, more than 20,000 tons of explosive mixtures were cast each month. Safety margins were so tight the workers referred to themselves as the silent front line. Ventilation ducts rattled above rows of steaming mixers. Inspectors patrolled with wooden mallets, tapping casings to judge if the fill had cooled evenly. Each plant operated under color-coded zones: red for high risk, yellow for warming areas, green for storage. The practice of agriculture, long obsessed with fertilizer's balance of moisture and granule size, was mirrored perfectly here. Even the language transferred. Engineers discussed yield, purity, and stabilization, but the harvest they sought was measured in kilotons. Across the Atlantic, America's Chemical War Service supervised the same metamorphosis. The DuPont and Hercules Powder Companies recycled peacetime fertilizer kills for wartime nitration. In Canada, the nitratine factories near Niagara Falls adapted hydroelectric energy for bulk national output. Chemistry has no flag, one Allied analyst later wrote. Only purpose decides its allegiance. Every nation dismantled or preserved its own moral firewall differently, but the pattern was universal. Factories as instruments, scientists as accelerators, and the humble nitrogen atom as the coin of the realm. From reports gathered after the war, historians learned how similarly the Axis pursued the nitrate route. In Germany, resource scarcity forced innovation born of desperation. Synthetic fuel plants, fertilizer kilns, and munitions factories became branches of a single industrial organism known as the nitrogen economy. At IG. Farben's Bitterfeld complex, chemists labored to maintain precise humidity control that would prevent ammonium nitrate from absorbing airborne water. The Reich Ministry for Armaments issued instructions identical in concept to those in British technical bulletins thousands of kilometers away. Soldiers on every front loaded shells filled with compounds sharing nearly the same ratios, the same crystalline logic. The irony was staggering. Mortal enemies detonating variations of one scientific recipe. In the occupied territories, smaller proxy plants in Norway and Czechoslovakia produced nitrate salts under camouflage of fertilizer enterprises. Resistance fighters at times sabotaged shipments, aware that each barrel of plant nutrient was likely bound for an explosives depot. When Sweden intercepted a consignment in 1943 labeled agricultural aid, they discovered over 100 tons of stabilized ammonium nitrate prills, military grade. Such episodes revealed chemistry's profound neutrality. Molecules cannot choose their masters. When mixed with compassion, they feed. Mixed with fear, they annihilate. No innovation of that era captured the moral whiplash of total war more starkly than the nitrate story. The same nitrogen that greened Europe's fields became the element that blackened its cities. In peacetime, ammonium nitrate was a symbol of reconstruction, a promise that technology could end hunger. Under bombardment, it was a cruel echo of that promise. After the armistice of 1918, many had celebrated chemistry as salvation. By 1945, it was clear that the salvation and the suffering were identical twins. Scientists debated responsibility in cautious post-war journals, rarely naming themselves, yet confessing collective unease. Some justified their work by invoking survival. If we had not done it, our enemies would have. Others, notably British explosive engineer W.M. Jones, admitted that each advance left an aftertaste one cannot easily wash away. The paradox extended beyond morality into the physical world. Bomb-scarred farmland was later sown again with the same fertilizer that had leveled nearby towns. Nitrates seeped into rivers, feeding algae blooms, a lingering biological reminder of wartime production. Nothing in nature could distinguish a molecule freed by a plow from one released by a bomb blast. Yet people remembered. Farmers who'd lost sons returned to spread the white granules with a quiet reverence, as though appeasing a restless spirit of science. Chemists who had served in explosives departments often moved permanently into agricultural research afterward, trying perhaps to rebalance the cosmic ledger. The most haunting truth lay in scale. The fertilizer that made TNT 40% more powerful also made the conflict itself 40% more efficient, more sustained, more absolute. Humanity had traded scarcity for abundance, and abundance for annihilation. When the battles finally turned, in the air over Germany, on beaches in Normandy, across deserts in North Africa, it wasn't just soldiers adapting, but the molecules themselves. The same chemistry that yielded amytal would soon yield the next leap in explosive science, RDX, a compound with twice TNT's energy density. The seeker's instinct, to refine, to perfect, to intensify, had no off switch. And that relentless search, once sparked, carried the world into the decisive years where every ounce of power extracted from nitrogen decided the fate of millions. The pressure of progress was building, literally and metaphorically. Factories hummed, skies darkened with bombers, and scientists adjusted formulas in pursuit of something even more potent. The moment of transformation, where fire ceased being a tool and became an ecosystem of its own, was close at hand. Summer 1940. Europe convulses beneath the thrum of engines and the methodical percussion of air raids. To civilians, war is now sound before sight. The growing, vibrating hum that says bombs have been loaded, that chemistry itself is coming. Inside a British bomber base, armorers roll glistening green casings beneath the open wings of Avro Lancasters. Chalk marks along the ordnance read 500 pounds, amytal fill. The smell is acrid, industrial, with a metallic sweetness that clings to coats and hair. Every man on that airfield knows their cargo is different from the early weeks of the war. Lighter, stronger, infinitely more numerous. The fertilizer trick has become an empire of destruction. When those aircraft lift into the lowering dusk, they carry perhaps the most consequential chemistry lesson ever taught midair. At detonation, TNT melts into incandescent gas. Ammonium nitrate releases oxygen, and the reaction front leaps forward at nearly 7 kilometers a second. In that moment, agriculture's benefactor turns incendiary demon, sculpting earth, steel, and human will alike. The Battle of Britain tests not only machines and pilots, but the power supply of nitrogen. Behind the scenes, production statistics rule strategy. While German bombers pour explosive tonnage onto London, Britain's Ministry of Supply calculates how long its amytal reserves can sustain counteroffensives. The answer: long enough. Without the substitution, there would have been far fewer bombs to answer the blitz. But efficiency carries its own horror. From Hamburg to Coventry, from Kiel to Plymouth, the improvement in blast yield magnifies destruction exponentially. Entire streets vanish under charges that, chemically speaking, owe their reach to a farmer's variance on fertilizer ratios. Each explosion tests the invisible bridge between economy and extermination. At the same time, the Axis pursues parallel revolutions. In Germany, V-weapon engineers mix ammonium nitrate with powdered aluminum to create triolin, a dense warhead compound designed for maximum underwater shock. The technology soon feeds into both torpedo loads and rocket munitions. Nothing remains static. Every breakthrough demands a stronger successor. In the Mediterranean theater, depth charges packed with amytal hunt U-boats interdicting Allied convoys. When one detonates even 3 meters too close, pressure waves turn water into a temporary fist that crumples steel hulls inward. Submarine commanders soon learn to dread not just the sound of propellers above, but the gurgling hiss of distant chemical reaction below, a fertilizer asserting dominion in the oceans. Meanwhile, every ton of nitrate consumed by war subtracts from fields starving for restoration. Agricultural yields dip. Civilians queue for rationed bread, while the factories once built to fatten soil now feed flame. The irony cuts deepest in winter, when frost-coated silos stand empty beside depots roaring with amytal batches bound for the front. By 1942, the Allied war councils understand they've reached an inflection point. The fertilizer-TNT combination has granted parity, even advantage, in firepower. Yet the laboratories show doors to a newer realm, super explosives like RDX and Torpex that the amytal experiments made feasible. Their synthesis owes its lineage directly to the insight that more oxygen equals more violence released in less time. Through this lens, amytal isn't an endpoint but a catalyst, a transitional species in the evolution of controlled detonation. And like all transitional forms, its existence proves adaptability under stress. Mankind's instinct to refine destruction just faster than conscience can follow. January 1943. In a test chamber near Fort Halstead, British engineers prepare comparative trials between amytal and emergent RDX blends. The atmosphere inside is clinical, reverent. When the detonator circuit closes, the concrete block shivers under a white flash brighter than welding arc fragments rebound like shrapnel from invisible armor. Measurement instruments flutter. The readings confirm what intuition already knew. The fertilizer has reached its ceiling, and science has already leapt beyond it. Amytal gave wings to industry, RDX would give claws. Yet without that original, ridiculous experiment, the whole chain of discovery might never have advanced so rapidly. The farmer's handful of nitrate had opened a path straight through the heart of 20th century warfare. On the battlefield, no one senses transformation in such terms. To the soldier crouched in the mud or the civilian beneath a trembling ceiling, fire is fire. Still, somewhere in the smoke, chemistry keeps score. Every ratio, every molecule, every marginal increase in efficiency is registered by nature like tally marks carved into stone. By late 1943, with Allied bombing of German industrial centers imminent, the chemistry of destruction reaches mass production scale unprecedented in history. And as those factories thunder through the night, one question lingers over every loading bay and clipboard. Have we finally extracted all that power can offer, or is there yet another secret hiding in the simplest of elements? That uncertainty would drive the final stage, when the race for explosive superiority crosses the threshold between conventional and cataclysmic. The winter of 1944 is cold beyond memory. The world's factories burn hot against it. Entire cities have become measuring instruments for chemistry's reach. At Woodford and Buttonwood, production of amytal peaks even as a new generation of compounds begins muscling it aside. RDX and Torpex might be the wunderkinds, but they owe every line of their formula sheets to the nitrate TNT experiments of 4 years prior. Chemists now understand exactly how to blend oxygen balance, combustion rate, and density, a direct inheritance from the fertilizer years. In laboratories where white coats once ferried beakers, men now speak in kilotons. Nothing about this feels theoretical anymore. Over the skies of Germany, the newly standard ordnance, part amytal, part RDX, falls in rhythmic cascades. They level synthetic fuel refineries, weapon depots, and airfields. The chemistry that once tethered hunger and harvest has converted, molecule by molecule, into strategic momentum. Consider Operation Gamara, Hamburg, 1943-44. British bombers overload their bays with high-capacity amytal bombs designed to burst roofs before incendiaries drop through them. The initial blasts carve conduits for firestorms below. When the final waves retreat, nearly half the city is in embers. Tactical victory blurs into moral nightmare. Moments like these forge the paradox of modern warfare. Efficiency serving catastrophe. Each advance that protects one soldier at the front amplifies collateral grief somewhere behind the lines. And at the molecular core of it, unchanged, unthinking, remain the same atoms of nitrogen freed from air long ago. By 1944, factories working on Allied soil have perfected continuous amytal casting. Molten TNT runs through heated conduits. Automated feeders dump measured nitrate powder into the flow. The mixture sets in conveyors that cool within minutes, ready for assembly lines. This process, adapted from food canning machinery, is an eerie echo of the product's dual heritage, nourishment and annihilation sharing the same mechanical rhythm. Across the channel, German industry reels under aerial assault but continues its desperate chemistry in subterranean plants near the Harz Mountains. Engineers experiment with thin nitrate mixture 43, a last-ditch attempt to maintain explosive yield under dwindling raw material supply. The reports, later captured by Allied intelligence, confirm identical equations on both sides of the war, a mirror image of scientific progression separated only by ideology. By the spring of 1945, the trend is irreversible. Amytal still fills shells and mines in staggering quantities, but the research focus has migrated. The search for power per weight now points beyond simple nitrogen chemistry toward complex molecular lattices that can release vastly greater energy. The fertilizer that once made TNT 40% more powerful has become the prototype for a philosophy. Nothing is strong enough, fast enough, destructive enough until the enemy cannot answer. At Los Alamos in the American desert, a handful of scientists reached the far horizon of that logic. Their work succeeds because of what came before, because the generations of chemists who learned to harness nitrogen's volatility have already mapped the terrain of controlled reactions. In early notebooks from the Manhattan Project, engineers even reference early TNT nitrate testing to describe energy density scaling. The path from a farm field in Shropshire to a plutonium implosion lens runs straighter than most care to admit. Back in Europe, the human consequences crystallize. Millions of tons of ammitol have been detonated above battlefields, harbors, and cities. The earth itself is chemically altered, nitrate residues enrich soil, but poison rivers. Soldiers trudging through the shattered countryside notice that weeds spring faster in bomb craters than in untouched ground. The grotesque fertility of war. The end approaches like an experiment reaching its conclusion. By April 1945, Allied armies drive into Germany through terrain littered with half-used munitions, many stamped Ammitol 80/20ths filling. Their dull yellow remnants form the punctuation marks of an era. When Hitler's regime collapses and Japan finally surrenders months later, the silence that follows feels heavier than the explosions that preceded it. Yet, even in peace, the hum of the nitration plants does not stop. Contracts are rewritten. Ministry of Supply Explosives Division becomes Agricultural Chemicals Board. Work continues under new banners, producing the same white crystals, but this time destined for soil instead of steel. Behind closed laboratory doors, scientists clean instruments blackened by years of testing. Some return to academia to lecture about improved fertilizers, teaching post-war students the same reaction equations stripped of horror. They talk about yield again in the old sense, bushels, not bomb loads. But every beaker click carries memory. The war has proven a blunt truth. Ideas rarely shrink back to their original size. Once knowledge exists, application is only a matter of will. Ammonium nitrate, the simple molecule that once promised bounty, now lives a double life forever. And as the world exhales into peace, the camera of history pans one last time across those reclaimed fields. Farmers walk among shallow depressions overgrown with grass, unaware that the soil beneath them is richer for ashes that fell from the sky. From those fields, the next chapter begins, not of war, but of consequence. The chemistry that delivered victory must now deliver redemption. When the guns finally stopped, the war left behind a silence that was anything but empty. Beneath that stillness stretched an altered world, scarred cities, saturated soils, and laboratories faced with an identity crisis. Every ton of ammonium nitrate mixed into shells had multiplied TNT's force. Every detonation had scattered those nitrates back into the environment. Across bomb-scarred Europe, agronomists began noticing something uncanny, vegetation sprouting thickly on crater rims. The very explosion that stripped life had fertilized its own aftermath. Nature, ever literal, was recycling the chemistry of destruction into renewal. Factories that had pulsed day and night for war didn't shut down. They rebranded. The Nitrogen Division of Britain's Ministry of Supply became the Fertilizer Development Board. Former powder engineers were reassigned to peacetime production. Conveyors that once cooled shells now bagged soil nutrients. The rationing offices took down blackout curtains, but left the fluorescent lights on. There was too much rebuilding to do. Civilian reports from 1946 show how post-war planners framed their progress. The same processes that won our victory shall now win our bread. It was deliberate symbolism. In truth, it masked the economic necessity of keeping millions employed and vast chemical plants functional. For nations on both sides, nitrogen was destiny. Once a weapon, now a recovery plan. Britain's agricultural drive called it Operation Fertility. Germany's shattered countryside followed suit under Allied supervision, using salvaged nitrate stocks to revive production. In the United States, where industry had expanded beyond conceivable scale, government contracts converted ammunition storage into fertilizer depots almost overnight. Advertising leaflets in rural towns displayed a smiling farmer and the slogan, "Peace grows from science." Few wanted to acknowledge that last year's firepower was today's field feed. In laboratories, chemists returned to questions they had shelved during the Blitz. How could fertilizers increase yields without the environmental instability caused by wartime mass production? Papers in Nature and the Journal of the Chemical Society from 1947 quietly referenced earlier energetic compound research as the basis for improved agricultural nitrate granules. War data had become agriculture's footnotes. Yet the psychological shock within science ran deeper than economics. Many who had refined explosives felt an unspoken guilt. They had solved practical problems with elegance, moisture stabilization, burn rates, uniform crystallization, and each solution had amplified destruction. Post-war scientific conferences overflowed with an almost moral vocabulary: responsibility, application, dual use. For the first time, chemistry itself felt self-conscious. Every nation used post-war optimism to hide unease. In Britain, ships returning loads of fertilizer were greeted with civic parades. In Germany, rebuilding farmers sprinkled nitrate over fields still containing unexploded ordnance. Every handful of those pale granules betrayed centuries of dual meaning: life and death bound by the same nitrogen bonds. But there was something redemptive in that duality. The same synthesis that had shaken the earth was now coaxing wheat from once-burned soil. Across Europe, country by country, fields once cratered by war began to shimmer green again, an eerie but welcome irony. Scientists used the data of explosives manufacture to create better crop fertilizers, more controlled soil uptake, and faster yields, ending famine in regions that had faced starvation only a few winters earlier. The chemistry had not changed. Humanity's context had. The conversion from bomb to bread wasn't symbolic theater. It was tangible proof that even the darkest innovations could be reclaimed by another purpose. Still, no one forgot where it came from. Memorials rose in industrial towns to the munitions workers who died in factory accidents. Plaques mentioned fires, explosions, and bravery, all tied to the invisible empire of nitrogen. In nearly every account, there lingered the same paradoxical pride, the idea that their labor, whether in shell or silo, had sustained the nation. And as Reconstruction gathered pace, ministers and generals alike repeated the same refrain in speeches about the new dawn. War had taught them that chemistry was the truest weapon of all, and now, at last, it might be redirected toward life instead of death. But history seldom lets innovation rest peacefully. Just beyond this optimism, new uses for that same chemical knowledge were forming, uses that would test whether society's promises of restraint could withstand its unending appetite for progress. The peace was never pure silence. It was a low mechanical hum rolling through rebuilt landscapes. Munitions foundries didn't vanish, they evolved. Their chimneys smoke again, this time under different names, reforged into chemical industries. Ammonium nitrate remains at their heart, as faithful and volatile as ever. By 1948, governments on both sides of the former divide raced to secure agricultural independence. Nitrate had become the cornerstone of Reconstruction aid, the Marshall Plan in the West, Soviet assistance programs in the East. In the same warehouses where crates of 500-pound bombs had once been stacked, sacks now bore bright logos of nitrophos fertilizers. Yet anyone who had handled the wartime ordnance recognized the weight. Only the labels had changed. The economic miracle of post-war Europe was, in no small measure, financed by the same chemistry that had leveled its cities. Fields rejuvenated by synthetic fertilizer outproduced pre-war harvests within 5 years. Nations spoke of feeding the peace. Engineers who had once calibrated pressure gauges for explosive casting now monitored ammonia synthesis columns. They called their work sustainable, though everyone knew that just below that optimism lay archives of blast data no one wished to revisit. In debriefing chambers, Allied intelligence units pored over captured German research ledgers. Among the notes on amytal and triolin were startlingly advanced formulations, early speculation on shaped charges, and oxygen-balanced compounds approaching theoretical detonation limits. Those discoveries seeded the next stage of weapons technology from Korea to the Cold War nuclear laboratories. No wall, however high, could divide chemistry's dual soul. Civil plants and defense facilities shared engineers, suppliers, and even coffee breaks. By the early 1950s, the fertilizer industry's scale became too huge to confine. Accidents in storage depots served as grim reminders of its progeny. In Apa, 1921, and later in Texas City, 1947, vast explosions of stored ammonium nitrate mirrored wartime blasts, an echo physically unintentional but symbolically precise. The molecule had returned to proclaim its neutrality once more. Governments responded with regulations, ventilation codes, moisture standards, labeling systems, while quietly preserving nitrate production capacity for strategic reserves. The fertilizer that fed Europe remained, in bureaucratic memos, a potential mobilization material. Peace had its arsenals just as surely as war had its laboratories. On the cultural front, the paradox matured into myth. Poets wrote of harvests born from thunder. Economists extolled chemical rebirth. In classrooms, children learned that nitrogen made everything from bread to bombs, but were taught to emphasize the bread. It was a comforting half-truth, easier to applaud than to comprehend fully. The veteran chemists aged quickly. Some died young, lungs scarred by years among nitration fumes. Others retired to universities, mentoring a new generation that viewed their war stories as relics. But within their lectures lived an unspoken caution. Every discovery carries two thresholds, the one you cross knowingly and the one you don't realize you've breached until it's far behind you. By the late 1950s, global demand for food and energy intertwined permanently. Synthetic fertilizers expanded across Asia and Africa, often under international aid banners. Post-war hunger receded, replaced by the subtler worry of dependency on industrial chemistry. The world, in reconstructing itself, had doubled down on the very substance that once obliterated its cities. And so, the final lines of the Ammittal story fold neatly into the broader narrative of the century. Ingenuity indifferent to morality, always obedient to necessity. The same molecule that plowed soil also cracked concrete. Humanity, for all its progress, remained both farmer and fire starter, unable to separate the two destinies it had written in nitrogen. As night settles on a peaceful but uneasy world, factory lights glint like tiny suns on the horizon. Inside, valves hiss and furnaces whisper familiar reactions. Chemistry keeps working, neither good nor evil, awaiting instruction. The world now feeds itself on the same substance that once taught it, terribly, how much power a simple, ridiculous experiment could unleash. And from that realization arises a quieter, more haunting question. If every war plants the seeds of the next within its own science, what harvest waits in the soil of tomorrow? Dawn settles over reclaimed farmland. There are no sirens now, no glow on the horizon, only mist curling above green rows of wheat. The air smells faintly of fertilizer, the same pale crystals that once thundered through bomb bays and artillery barrels. What began as a farmer's curiosity, a fertilizer that seemed almost too reactive, became an inflection point in human history. A single observation about nitrogen's vigor rewrote the logistics of global war, then rewired the global food chain. It is a reminder that knowledge itself has no conscience. Conscience belongs only to those who choose how to use it. Every generation inherits the chemistry of the last along with its ghosts. The old Ammittal bunkers still lie hidden under meadows, their concrete sweating faint nitrate salts each spring. Above them, crops wave in orderly symmetry as if blessing or forgiving what churns beneath. From that layered earth rises the paradox that defines modernity. The same hands that break the world are asked to feed it again. When historians tally the victors of the Second World War, they speak of nations, generals, and machines. Yet standing quietly among them is an invisible ally. Nitrogen, liberated from the air, drafted from the farm, and given orders it never questioned. Its story is both triumph and warning, that human ingenuity, once ignited, seldom distinguishes between nurture and annihilation. The true legacy of that ridiculous fertilizer trick does not lie in the power it lent to TNT, but in the mirror it holds before us. It shows a species forever testing the limits of transformation, convinced that mastery of matter equals mastery of consequence. And so the camera closes on that same modest field, peaceful, sunlit, yet undeniably shaped by the explosions of another age. Beneath the soil, chemistry hums on, waiting for instruction, patient as history itself. The farmer presses a handful of granules into the ground and wipes his palms clean. The earth responds the only way it knows, by growing. Whether that growth becomes bloom or blast will always, and only, depend on us.